Reviewing the design of my exercise program and session 14.4 by Edward Sayers. To make sure the program that I was setting was applicable for my client, I carried out a PARQ. This was carried out to gain an understanding of the exercise that I could and could not set for my client. This was based on the individual's health and fitness levels. As well as the PARQ, I also filled out a lifestyle and barriers questionnaire. This was done not only to understand the motors of my client, but to come up with a well-suited plan for my client that would suit both their lifestyle and other commitments. For example, one of my clients was unable to do fitness sessions on both days of the weekend due to work commitments. Carrying out these questionnaires enables us to develop a more effective plan which is more suitable for our client, allowing us to help our client reach their aims by the end of the 6-week program. If we talk about the exercises themselves, I chose to carry out continuous training for at least one session a week because it will help my client to improve their aerobic fitness and their cardiovascular fitness as well. This continuous training will mean that our heart and lungs will need to constantly keep on supplying a satisfactory amount of oxygen to the muscles to help them keep on working through this continuous exercise. Fartlek training is another type of exercise used to target more the cardiovascular endurance, which is why I have tried to include at least one session of fartlek training in my 6-week program. To make sure that the cardiovascular system is being targeted during this program, I made sure that enough time was being spent on each type of speed play, which is why I decided to start off with a 20-minute session, which involved walking for 2 minutes, jogging for 2 minutes, and then finally sprinting for the last 30 seconds. And then increasing the duration of each type of speed over the next 6 weeks. If the duration is too short, then it could be argued that the cardiovascular system has not been targeted, which wouldn't have made the program suitable for my client. Not only is fartlek training another method of targeting my client's cardiovascular system, I also use this type of training to increase the variation within my 6-week program, which would help my client prevent experiencing tedium. If all my 6-week training programs were just continuous training, then my client would start to get very bored and experience tedium within my program and possibly lose interest and motivation whilst doing my program. This is why variation is vital within a 6-week program like this, because it maintains a level of motivation and interest within the exercises. I have included 3 rest days each week to make sure that my client has a sufficient amount of rest to allow their muscles to recover and to make them more efficient in the sessions to come, and more importantly to allow the adaptations of the cardiovascular system to actually take place. In my client's lifestyle questionnaire, they stated that they do play sport outside of college. They do the sport 2 times a week. I took this information in whilst making my 6-week program and have made sure that I have allowed enough rest time between both their outside of college exercise and the sessions that I have provided them with. So I've set the same format each week for my client to do, with slight variations on each, which, as I said, is used to help prevent tedium. The reason for this is that I can help my client get into a routine, help to increase my client's confidence levels as they become used to what they are doing. However, I did change the intensity that my client was working at. Continuous training alone can become quite boring for my client. Therefore, I knew that adding variation into my program was vital to keeping my client interested and motivated when doing my 6-week program. Each week I decided to increase the intensity from the week previous, making sure that I wasn't increasing the intensity each session, because then this would make the exercises become much too hard for my client to partake in, and then this might reduce the amount of effort that they put in, which would then decrease the result that they would like to see, which is what we don't want to happen. In addition to the changes in intensity, I also changed the duration of each session. This was increased in between a range of 10 and 20 minutes each session. This was mainly done to reduce tedium and to further improve my client's cardiovascular and aerobic endurance. If the duration and intensity was kept the same throughout the whole of the 6 weeks, then my client's cardiovascular system would become used to the new duration and would no longer be improving, which is what we constantly want to be happening. Now, if we move on to my second client, Client B, Client 2 had a much more restricted program, as they were unable to partake in particular exercises such as running due to a recent knee operation. I therefore had to take this into consideration when coming up with my client's 6-week program, and therefore had to come up with alternative exercises which will allow my client to keep doing exercise, but making sure that they weren't straining their knee. As I've said previously, they had the knee operation. So this means that I had to include exercises such as cycling and swimming. My client did not go under any running exercises for the first 2 weeks, and it was only implemented in the 3rd week once their knee had fully recovered. However, this started off very basic with some light jogging to make sure that my client was getting used to running on their knee again and not going straight in with heavy maximal endurance sprinting, for example. However, it did eventually progress over the following weeks. As the client is also working on their aerobic endurance, I made sure that I included both continuous and fartlek training in their 6-week training program. This was done to make sure that I targeted their CV system to make sure that adaptations did occur, which is what my client asked. An example of an adaptation could be cardiovascular hypertrophy, this meaning that the walls of the myocardium would therefore increase in size, leading to more blood being pumped around the body from each heart's contraction, which therefore leads to a larger cardiac output, due to a higher stroke volume and a lower end systolic volume. So for the first 3 weeks, my client will only partake in 1 session a week. This is due to their barriers. The client is in full-time work and also has 2 younger children. However, the client did state that they could carry out a session on 1 weekend day. Therefore, for the remaining 3 weeks of the program, I got my client to take up an extra session which involved a little bit of weight training. Besides their cardiovascular and aerobic endurance, my client also wanted to improve their muscular endurance. This is why I've decided to introduce weight training into their 6-week program. As my client wants to work on endurance, I made them carry out lower body exercises with a low weight but a high number of reps. I made sure I kept this the same for weeks 4 and 5, as they have only just recently been introduced to the new weight training program. Therefore, I didn't want to overload their lower body and especially their knee with high volumes of pressure, so to prevent a recurring injury. However, on the 6th week, I increased the weight of my client's weight training by 2 kilograms, from 10 kilograms to 12 kilograms, to make the adaptations of their muscular endurance take place. The reason for not introducing the weight training at the very start of the program in week 1 is because I didn't want to overload my client's knee with too much pressure straight after their operation had taken place. Therefore, I decided to introduce it on the 3rd week, as I believed that was enough time for their knee to recover from their operation. I started off my program with my client's running exercises to be in the form of interval training. My reasoning for this is because my client hasn't used their knee in a running circumstance for some time, so I wanted to gradually introduce them to running on their knee again. Getting them into doing high intensity continuous training will just lead to exerted pressure being placed onto my client's knee, which is what I didn't want to do due to the recent operation. Therefore, allowing them to have sufficient rest intervals in each session will allow my client's knee to have sufficient rest time and therefore hopefully prevent injury. This was the case for weeks 3 and 4. However, in weeks 5 and 6, I adapted it so that my client will be undergoing continuous running. Not only to implement a little bit of variation into my client's program, but to get their knee to be used to being under a higher amount of pressure, as well as making sure I was definitely targeting my client's cardiovascular and aerobic endurance. This was done to make sure that the adaptations were still progressing in my client. I kept my client's sessions relatively quite short, about 20 minutes to start off with, as my client hasn't undergone much exercise in recent months. On my client's rest days, I recommended for them to do some simple and easy knee strengthening exercises. This is because the knee has not been properly used in a rather long time, and is now being demanded to deal with increased amounts of pressure from the exercises. Therefore, carrying out these simple strengthening exercises will enable the knee joint itself to strengthen and the surrounding ligaments and tendons to strengthen also. This will therefore gradually allow the knee to adapt and cope with the higher amounts of pressure that they will undergo during my 6-week training program, resulting in a decreased risk of injuries occurring. So we can now move on to my exercise session itself. So again, like before, I began my session with filling out a PARQ risk assessment. Within my session, I decided to work on cardiovascular endurance in particular. This meant I was using exercises that particularly targeted people's cardiac hypertrophy to therefore hopefully increase my group's cardiovascular endurance. I decided to focus on fartlek training, which is used to help improve cardiovascular endurance, as it looks at working at different intensities. The type of exercise I decided to focus on the most was fartlek training, and the reason for this is that it's very easy with fartlek training to prevent tedium, as you can quite easily adapt the session to make everyone still be motivated and interested in the session. You can adapt the walking, jogging and sprinting distances. Another reason why I chose to do fartlek training in particular is because it's very easy to explain and also demonstrate, and it's also easy for my clients to carry out and perform themselves. Fartlek training also requires minimal amounts of equipment, which that also makes it easier to move between each exercise. I had a system of progression within my exercise, so I started off with a relatively light exercise with a longer walking and jogging distance, but then as the session progressed, I decided to reduce the distance of the walking exercise and increase the distance of the sprinting exercise to increase the intensity and, like I said, reduce the duration of the lighter exercises. These progression exercises add more variation to my session, which therefore hopefully implements a greater interest within my session, while still hopefully benefiting my client's cardiovascular endurance. Having progression allows adaptations to take part within the needed muscle groups to make sure that the aim is being fulfilled of improving cardiovascular endurance. So within any fitness session, it's important to know alternative exercises that can be carried out if and when needed. I did have some alternative exercises in mind, however, whilst going through my session, I did not feel the need to implement any, as I felt as though no one in my session felt it too easy yet too difficult, so I didn't feel the need to implement these alternative exercises. I know that these alternative exercises are used to include everyone in the group. However, like I said, they weren't needed because everyone in the session was already included within the exercises that I had previously set. And that's the end of my video. Thank you for watching.